Oops. Okay, we're going to get started here pretty quick. If everyone could get settled. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds. Hey, June. Is the phone ready for getting started? Okay, I'm going to go.
I'm sure traffic was fun getting over this way. I'm sure traffic was fun getting this way. Yeah. Yeah, it's always these meetings starting with this time. It's a thing. Say that again? Oh, good work. Good work in that then.
Okay, well, we are going to call this meeting to order. This is the meeting of the Portland Clean Energy Fund Grants Committee. We're going to start with an opening inspiration from Faith Graham, our committee member, and then move into introductions and public comment. Faith?
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. And this is not from me. This is from Kimberly Blasser, who is a poet, a living poet. And I think this poem speaks for itself, and it's quite long with a few words that I don't know how to pronounce, so bear with me, and if anyone knows the pronunciation, feel free to shout it out. And I chose this. I thought it was very apropos for this evening, especially as we're talking about housing. And I think it will speak for itself, but I think that the bottom line is that housing is more than the dwelling in which you live. So this poem's called Housing Conditions of 150 Chippewa Families. White Earth Reservation, 1938. Wigwam, peaked lodge, bark house, teepee, log house, tar paper shack, frame house, U.S. rehabilitation house. Sister Helga, you counted each one. 71 tar paper shacks, 80 United States rehabilitation houses, 2 wigwams, bark houses at rice camps. You graphed, photographed, measured dimensions, calculated cubic airspace, enumerated every construction detail. 23 with broken windows, 99 without foundations, buildings resting on the ground, 98 with stovepipes for chimneys, house, dwelling, place, structure, home. June to November, the year my mother turned 5, Mary Ann, as you walked these lands, the fervor of your order tucked under one billowing black-sleeved arm, amassing details of crowded quarters, common law marriages, miscegenation, illegitimate children, limited education, economic dependence on the WPA and CCCs, for charts that have outlived those Anishinaabe of the 150 chosen families. Now you perch in my history at one of 71 homemade or 79 factory-made tables, sitting tall and precise on one of the 84 benches, 49 backless chairs, or 81 armchairs, or standing, Mary Inez, in the homes of one of the 17 tar paper shack families, or 8 A-frame house families, for which you record none under the heading of chairs. Methodically, you recite like prayers of deliverance each prepared question. Why are so many unmarried mothers on the reservation? Why are there so many common law marriages on the reservation? What do you think can be done to stop the drinking to intoxication among the Indians? I hear you interrogate each family daily, gathering indulgences or ink smudge statistics on what you label in caps, social problems. Any unmarried mother in the home, any intoxication in the home, so dutifully you prompt each betrayal, father, mother, son, daughter, and then remind yourself in print, in a parenthetical aside, of the unreliability of the interviewee. Check this information with someone outside person. If anyone then or now could forget with whom resides the authority for your social accounting, Ah, sister, I pity you. The prickly mystery of those questions, whose answers could not be checked nor changed by some reliable outside person. So confidently you asked, would you like to leave this home? But 73% of the occupants of the tar paper shacks on White Earth Reservation in northwestern Minnesota in 1938 said no. No matter, you wrote, how dilapidated and inadequate the homes were, the tar paper shack families were quite unwilling to leave them. So they were asked again and asked another way because it was thought, knowing the alternative might change their mind. Would you like to move into a rehabilitation house, one of those fine new houses the Indian Bureau built for the Indians? But the negative answers grew. Fewer still would think of leaving their home. Not 35-year-old Anna, 50-year-old Mary, not a widowed mother, 61 years of age, living in the outskirts of one of the highway towns. Not old man Mink, 78 years of age, nor his wife, 10 years his junior, who agreed they liked their one-room shack. Not Mike, 29 and regular League of Nations, nor his white wife, Jane, 28, nor their 10-year-old son, Gowan. Gowan Niwi Naga Sanin. Like Jim, 40 years of age, and Ella, 38, they wanted to stay in the old ramshackled tar paper covered homes. And did you hear the bulrush psalms of Gawab Big Nika as you painstakingly recorded each softly intoned explanation? And does the land remember you, Sister Inez of the tar paper shack dwellers, as surely it remembers Mary, who felt well acquainted with the woods, or Anna, who believed she was living more like the old Indian ways? Somewhere in that rolling land of rich loam, in the adorned body of old man Mink, and perhaps somewhere roams the spirit of the Midi-Winwin elder who vowed, I'll stay right here, I won't leave here, I've lived here too long. I wonder, Mary Inez, did your BIA commissioned sojourn in the land of white clay somewhere lay its soul mark, looming crow dark at the ruled edges of report ledgers, spilling into cautious recollection, even as the measured drip of black ink might draw tabulations upon white pages? Before Minnesota winter winds rattled the 162 full-sized, 104 half-sized, and 47 less than half-sized unbroken windows, before the bilboon Nodin blew through those 23 homes with cardboard-covered broken windows, or blew through your tight-lipped post-allotment spirituality, you returned to the Order of St. Benedict and to the list of standards set out in 1935 by the National Association of Housing Officials. Those standards against which all our measurements fall short become sub-standard, subhuman. You left, Mary Inez, the Latin post, and rosemary zipped safely in one pocket, the names of each Midi-Winwin elder drumming and chanting in the other. Thanks.
Thank you, Faith. So we'll start introductions with committee members. Robin, if we can start with you, and then we'll move to staff and then the public.
Robin Waring.
Andrea Hamburg, she, her.
Rain Feast, Junitino Viaturo, he, him.
Shanice Brittany Clark, they, them, she, her.
Maria Sippen, she, they.
Megan Horst, she, her.
Faith Graham, she, her.
Jeffrey Moreland, he, him.
Michael Edenhill, he, him.
Sam Brasso, he, him. PCEF staff.
Sorry, I thought you were done. Katie Lister, she, her. Can I get this one? Okay. You're first. You're not, I mean, you're city staff. You can introduce yourself.
All right, Molly Rogers, she, her.
June Reyes, PCEF staff, she, hers.
Janet Hammer, PCEF staff, she, her.
James Valdez, PCEF staff, he, him.
Lily Brown, Sabin CDC, she, her.
Micah Meskel, he, him, Portland, Audubon.
Jose Miguel Asquez Verde, he, him.
Kimberly Horner, PCRI, she, her.
Charles Funchos, he, him.
Charles is from PCRI, so am I. Suzanne Vodri-Casals, she, her.
Peter Tofalvi, Homarex and Performance Insulation, he, him.
Deidre Sheets, Nutrition RX, she, her.
Jeff Strang, NAACP, no pronoun preference.
Diane Lynn, Proud Ground, she, her.
Sarah Stevenson, Innovative Housing, she, her.
Jenny Hall, Energy Trust of Oregon, she, her.
Don McCodrum, TRC, he, him.
Melissa Robson, Habitat for Humanity, Portland Metro, she, her.
Ryan Shanahan, Earth Advantage, he, him.
Eric Foley, Earth Advantage, he, him.
Cassandra Griffin, Community Cycling Center, she, her.
Angela Previdelli, Bureau of Planning Sustainability staff, she, her.
Mauro Mijares, Columbia Riverkeeper, he, him.
Ketty Loeb, Craft 3, she, her.
Sam Diaz, Office of Mayor Ted Wheeler, he, him.
Kristen Dennis, Office of Mayor Ted Wheeler, she, her.
No one on the phone? Okay, so there was no one on the phone, thank you all, and no one signed up for public comment. And so before we move into our first presentation, I wanted to invite Kristen Dennis, who is the Mayor's Chief of Staff, is at the meeting tonight and wanted to say a few words. So just push the button.
I don't usually get to get up and talk. Thank you all for having me. It's really wonderful to be here. Hello, I'm Kristen Dennis, Chief of Staff to Mayor Ted Wheeler, and I'm glad to be joining you all this evening. Thank you all for all of your hard work. And I'll be brief. I know you have some great guests to hear from next on affordable housing and multifamily housing and the opportunities in those sectors to reduce carbon emissions while delivering direct benefits to frontline communities. I'm here on behalf of the mayor to again reiterate his full support of your work, advancing something that has never been done before. PCEF is groundbreaking. There's a lot of attention on the work you are doing and a lot of interest and excitement to see what PCEF will achieve as the first grants go out the door. You are currently making important decisions to shape and set up the program, and we will expect that you will learn from the process and may need to make some adjustments as needed going forward. City Council is committed to supporting the necessary work over time to assure the fund meets its stated goals. One example of the work our administration is doing to smooth the path for PCEF projects. In December, Mayor Wheeler directed the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and Bureau of Development Services to work together to identify and mitigate potential permitting related barriers to the kinds of projects expected from the fund. The action the City Council took in December to clarify revenue collection rules for the fund was also critical to maintaining the stability of the fund moving forward. In the future, the City Council is committed to only considering changes to the fund that come from the committee through the process outlined in City Code. The Mayor and City Council are excited to see the first round of proposals later this year. We recognize this is a fast timeline, but maintaining a commitment to continuous improvement and demonstrating early success will be critical for the future of the fund. I want to thank you all for your hard work and for volunteering to serve on this committee. Please let us know how the council can continue to support you and be a resource for you in the future. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I did realize that we skipped over approval of the minutes, so I just wanted to ask if there were any edits or comments or changes from committee members on the minutes from the January 28th meeting. All right, seeing none, we'll call those approved, and I'd like to introduce Molly Rogers, who's a Deputy Director of the Portland Housing Bureau, to give the sort of an overview of affordable housing in Portland.
Thank you, PCEF Grant Committee members. Good evening. My name is Molly Rogers. I'm the Deputy Director of the Portland Housing Bureau. Just wanted to quickly acknowledge Faith Graham and also Katie for talking with me around all the various topics we could cover tonight. There's a variety of different levels and information we could cover. I'm calling this sort of a blend of 1.0 and 2.0 of affordable housing, because we want to make this kind of a broad sweep of what our objectives are, who we're housing, and also give a little bit of some lessons learned that we have gleaned along the way as we were in your shoes not that long ago when we had a housing bond passed by the voters in end of 2016, and we had to go through a process to figure out the best deployment of those resources. And we're kind of on now the very different stage just from a year ago. So we're happy to share some of those stories with you. Please interrupt as you proceed, as I proceed, just so it's not just me talking the whole time. I do have a lot of slides because we have a lot of information to cover, so that, but I want it to be interactive if possible. Oops, how does this go?
Down to advance.
Oh, it's down, not up. Okay, fancy.
Yeah, there you go.
So what we do as a Housing Bureau, we have 4 main objectives. We are producing and preserving generally rental housing, provides long-term affordability for our community. We are providing homeownership assistance to help really for either first-time home buyers or those who need to be staying in their homes. We do a lot of work to prevent displacement, and that's for both renters and homeowners. We do work on tenant protections, legal aid funding, and home repair loans and grants. And we're also working very collaboratively with the Joint Office of Homeless Services to end homelessness as well as prevent homelessness through short-term rent assistance, and also really through the production of, we have a goal of 2,000 supportive housing units by 2028. Just a quick overview of our strategic initiatives. We have close to 15,000 regulated housing across Portland. And what we do is we try to stabilize families in their home by creating the long-term affordability and to foster equitable, integrated, and diverse communities. So you can see on this map, we've got housing really everywhere. Now, it's not equally applied. We do tend to, before the bond was passed, we had to depend quite a bit on tax increment financing. So you'll see certain clusters of areas that really match where those urban renewal areas were or are. And the bubbles kind of give you a sense of the size of the properties that we have across the board. We have over 3,000 units in our pipeline right now. It's the most we've ever had historically in our pipeline. We had record number of units that we opened last year, and we're hoping to break that record even this year. So we're having really trying to keep up, but barely keep up with the demand that we see right now in affordable housing. It is substantial. And when I say affordable housing, what I really mean is all the housing we build is for households that are earning 60% of area median income or less than that. And so in terms of the current AMI, area median income right now, for a family of 4, that represents an income level of $47,000 per year or less than that.
Can I ask a clarifying question? The regulated affordable units, does that mean those are publicly or city-owned units? Or is there an intersection between other, I know private ownership is a thing, and you might be unpacking this through your presentation, but just curious.
That's an excellent question, and it gives me an opportunity to do a shout out of some of our partners in the room who are actually the ones who are developing and owning a lot of this housing. So we've got PCRI here, we've got Innovative Housing, we've got Proud Ground, we've got Sabin Community Development Corporations. We generally work in partnership with private and nonprofit and even public owners of the housing, and generally what the city does is provide the financing for them to do the rest of the project. So we're trying to leverage our resources and work really in a way that meets the needs of those developers. And what we do is we have compliance, and we have our regulations. We try to achieve at least 60 years of affordability. We're trying to see if we can even get to 99 years of affordability through our financing.
Thank you.
So So as I mentioned before, we passed a bond of $258 million back in 2016, and I'm really thrilled to be able to share with you that through either some direct acquisitions prior to a change in our state constitution, and also through commitments. I'm gonna need some water. Commitments through a solicitation that we went through last year. We are set to exceed all of our goals. So it takes several years for multifamily to really get financed and developed and for people to move in. So we've done a blend of some early acquisitions, and we also are looking to build some new housing, so new supply in our market, so we can be really responsive to the needs, the unmet needs of low-income Portlanders. We created goals of not just total number of units, but also deeper affordability levels, as well as permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless individuals. And last but not least, we wanted to really push on our family size unit goals. So we didn't want to sacrifice our unit production by just focusing on smaller single occupancy kind of housing. We really wanted to see at least 2 bedrooms or greater size units in the housing that we're doing. Even though we do have we've committed all those funds. We have a little bit of money left over, and we're gonna try to be really strategic, but make sure we can meet the goals before we start deploying those resources. Next. We also do quite a bit of homeownership access. We've got partners here, Proground in particular, who can actually talk to a lot of our homeownership programs. But we're providing a variety of different subsidy levels and help with down payment assistance. We do loans. We've done homeownership education and counseling. There's like 1,000 households have gone through that kind of counseling with, say, Portland Housing Center and other types of partners that we do through that. We also have home retention loans and grants. And this is really for those larger scale repairs that people need to stay in their homes. It's really through a loan product where we are able to, we only were able to serve 27 households last year, and that's really just by virtue of the amount of resources we have for home loans. Most of the funding that goes into this type of service is really tax increment financing. So it's really specific to a couple of the urban renewal areas. And this is something when I specifically put out there how many is citywide. We have none right now. And this is where we see a huge need to be able to provide a citywide resource. And it's just one of those opportunities if there were places to meet some of our unmet needs, this would be that one, particularly in those areas. Ranfit?
Yeah, just a question on, given that we're on the topic of TIF, has there been like historical restrictions of how TIF can be used around affordable housing, whether it's being able to, now that we're in discussion here in PCEF, sort of to be used for home, like as a loan program or incentive program for renewables or energy efficiency in buildings?
So I'm certainly not an expert on TIF, but my understanding is really it's a pretty flexible resource, but it has to be for capital investments. So sticks and bricks, something that you can depreciate. I think this would be a great alignment with some of the energy efficiencies. Really, the more or less the restrictions have been more around this general, what we call the set-aside policy that we work with Prosper Portland. And so it only went into effect, I'm guessing about 10 years ago, where we actually had a set aside of a portion of the TIF money that would go towards affordable housing. And that has steadily increased over the last 10 years, up to about now 45% of the TIF money goes to affordable housing. So it's been a great resource for the community, but it's really specific to those particular boundaries.
And just because we're touching on it, this is Sam here. TIF, for those in the audience and others, just to be aware, TIF is tax increment financing. These are the resources that are accessible to our Economic Development Agency, Portland Prosper Portland, and it's specifically bound to specific geographic areas. And so that's what we talk about, those bubbles, and what you see are those are bound to specific geographic areas where you see urban renewal areas.
We also provide home retention grants. As you can see, this is a widely popular kind of service we're able to provide. It's a whole range of different types of basic repairs in someone's home. We're not able to offer that much, only $3,000 to $4,000 per household. Or per, really per grant, but we're working with some fabulous partners from Community Energy Project, PCRI, Unlimited Choices, Native American Youth and Family Center, Rebuilding Together, and Reach Community Development Corporation, who have the most access to know where those low-income homeowners are and have the construction management and be able to deploy those grants really effectively. And it's been fabulous to work with those partners. We do have a little bit more. We have some of these resources that are citywide, and which is great, so we can really spread out that assistance broader than just a particular geographic area. So we can really think about emerging neighborhood issues, market issues, thinking about where we're seeing more gentrification. We're seeing a lot more pressure in East Portland of really where we're seeing certain demographic trends, and we would love to see more citywide resources here to be able to help those folks in their homes kind of in that early stage of gentrification. So equity, we talk very broadly about equity at Portland Housing Bureau. It's something we look at for everything around who we're really housing and how we're housing them. So this just gives you a little bit of a sense of the folks that we are housing by different income levels. We kind of look at this as sort of a profile. Often people just don't have a sense of who's really eligible for this kind of housing. So we intend to look at these sort of the strata 0 to 30, 31 to 60, and also 61 to 80 in a lot of the policy work that we do. Someone at 0 to 30, really it's generally people who are on Social Security or disability benefits. And I mean, the benefits on Social Security really do not rise that much every year. It's pretty incredible how people are able to survive on just an SSI income. But they really can only really afford about $400 in rent. There's really virtually none in the city of $400 of rent unless you have some kind of subsidy, or it's really, really deeply subsidized housing with no debt. And then most of our housing is built between 31 and 60% area median income, and people who might be like a teacher or a community service representative. And then we do have some policies, like our inclusionary housing work that can go up to 80% of area median income. And this is generally when you see people maybe say in the trades with carpenters or people who are working full-time but at minimum wage. Where we see the greatest need of affordable housing, there's really no doubt that it's really the extremely low-income populations that are completely priced out of Portland. If you compare our supply and our demand, if you will, of the housing based on the different income levels, really 80% of the need is for our households that are earning 60% of area median income and below. And the most stark, of course, are those earning less than $22,000. Those are buildings that we have to look at. How do we build apartments for the long term that's deeply affordable in that area, but can serve a range of income levels? And that's always something we are always trying to balance in terms of our resources. Even if you get a rent-restricted apartment, doesn't necessarily mean you're rent-burdened. We know that 49% of renters across Portland is rent-burdened, so we look really carefully at that. And we also through our State of Housing report, we track communities of color, and we know that communities of color and single-mother households are completely priced out of Portland. A little bit more statistics of who lives in our housing. We've got just over 20,000 residing in rent-restricted housing that Portland has invested in. If you look at, so about 61% of those identify as white. And we've got a different, we got close to 18% black, less than 4% Asian, 4% Native American, very small, 0.93 Native Hawaiian. We've got 6% Hispanic, and we do have a pretty low percentage that are non-responsive. And that's across an average income of close to about $18,000 a year. And our average rent is just over $500. So it's trying to find that it's a scarce resource, and so we do need to see how we can expand as much of our affordable housing as possible. Those who identify, we got about a third are housing people who are over 62, and then just over a quarter are people who have a disability. Another part of our equity goals is really looking at who is getting the contracts and to actually build and construct the housing. In addition to that, we also really look at professional services. It's something that that Portland Housing Bureau set as an aspirational goals just a couple years ago, and it's something that's a policy that hasn't been fully adopted by the rest of the city. But what we really look at is also advancing our subcontractor goals. And we increased our goal to 30% of DMWESB. So for those of you just in acronym land, that's disadvantaged, minority, women, emerging, small business, and service-disabled, veteran-owned business enterprises. So it's a little bit of a mouthful. Well, I'll just rattle it off as DMWESB if that's all right. We created an aspirational goal of getting to 30% by 2021. So we adopted that when we did our bond solicitation last year. We just went straight to 30 because we knew that was going to take a couple years for our construction work to get underway. We also adhere to the city's workforce and training program goals. And like I said earlier, we're trying to push the envelope now in professional services. If you look at our outcomes, we track these really closely with the rest of the city. Our DMWESB outcomes last year was just over 24%.
Question over here. Would it be possible to get some of the data disaggregated for DMWESB utilization and SDV, just to sort of give us good context as a committee? What are the current challenges given the charge of the committee? And then also if that's possible on the workforce side. It sounds like there's some interesting goals, but just knowing some of the context behind some of those goals would be very helpful. So what is the current utilization of women and people of color within also in being employed on these projects?
Yeah, so be happy to get you a deeper dive of the data, absolutely. I think there is definitely something we've learned over the years that sometimes in terms of the certification and the co-bid process with the state, generally people want to be, how do we look at them in terms of not everyone is one particular category. So there are definitely some data challenges around the disaggregation, but we can break it down by WESB. It just won't get you that level of complexity that people have in terms of people could be following multiple categories. But be happy to share as much as we have.
And sorry, just an added question. I might be wrong on this, I could be butchering, but for some of the affordable housing projects, there's like, where there's federal dollars, there's like hiring goals for Section 8. Am I capturing that correctly?
Section 3.
Section 3.
Yeah, you're good.
Do you have data also to share, like how you've been able to meet Section 3 goals?
Yep.
Great.
Absolutely. Just to clarify or elaborate, Section 3 is a federal requirement when you use certain federal funds in certain projects, and it's really like it's like an MWSB goal, but for low-income residents. So it's how many low-income residents are those companies employing or contracting out with, and advancing actually job security for those folks. So thanks.
Thank you.
We have also adopted a green building policy. I wish my counterpart was here with me tonight, but she wasn't able to make it, in terms of really understanding the environmental elements of our green building policy. I'm sure many of you around the room could go into more depth around the technicalities of this. But our overarching goals is to really improve tenant health, also reduce operation and maintenance costs. We want to provide equitable access to high performance buildings. We promote environmental stewardship, and we are trying to advance and implement the City County Climate Action Plan and track with 100% renewable energy by 2050. So we look at life cycle analyses as projects come in, and we look at the rate of return and payback periods for a lot of the energy efficiency products and systems that people are bringing to these projects, and it's really exciting to see some of the technology coming out.
Molly, is this for bond funds, the 2016 bond, or is this all future funding?
This is all for future funding. Yep, this is our across-the-board policy.
And one more question. The 100% renewable goal, is that for the operation of the building for the owners and residents? Does that encompass construction or any of the actual building itself?
My understanding is really trying to get to that solar and EV, the long-term renewable operations of the building.
Thanks.
In the system. So we do have a little bit of a slightly different policy for new construction than rehab within that. So we've been advancing lead in Earth Advantage enterprise green communities for several years now. We've adopted that. We've looked at baseline requirements. And then for rehab, we also try to seek as much as we can lead in Earth Advantage Silver. And really often that does tend to come down to the actual scope of the work. Faith knows a lot about rehabs and how to finance energy efficiencies, and it is a challenge. So I think just very quickly in terms of our financing, just to give you a sense of how do resources line up when we build projects. We talk about a three-legged stool. People generally, in the business call it a capital stack. Gives you a little bit of this pie chart. So equity, at least in affordable housing, it's not like a traditional multifamily market investor that's getting a very specific, getting dividends or getting certain returns. What we do, the federal government created a low-income housing tax credit program back in 1989. 88, somewhere in the 80s, and really it's an offset of their income liability, and they get to invest in affordable housing, and they get to then take those credits over a 10-year period as long as they stay in the project for 15 years. In addition to that, so essentially it's for the developer's perspective, it's cash. And it can pay up to, be a third of the project cost. There's two different types of tax credits, but I won't get into that. And then there's debt, and that is something that is also that is more of a traditional or conventional financing mechanism that you see in multifamily market rate housing. And that's when you go to the bank and you say, how much can I borrow from you? And they look at your operating sustainability, and they'll determine how much debt you can carry for the term of the loan. Because our rents are restricted and our expenses have to match the population we're housing, we just can't carry the same level of debt as the market rate. So what happens is we get to the gap. The gap is where Portland comes in or the state comes in, and we say we will provide that subsidy to help make the project work. So these are just a variety of different subsidy sources that we deploy. An average affordable housing project can take 10 to 12 different funding streams for it to get developed and constructed. It's a very consuming, onerous task that these developers go through. Generally, these are competitive resources, so you're having to time cycles of awards over the course of 2 to 3 years to get all your sources assembled. Energy Trust of Oregon and other energy incentive programs and also weatherization funds have been a huge resource to really look at to get to those energy efficient green building goals met. Okay, so in terms of our sort of affordable housing primer experiences, how do you set rents? How do you know what's affordable? Generally, this is a calculation that's based on the whole area median income of our county city, and it takes into account that you should not be paying more than 30% of your rent and utilities, so your full housing costs. Shouldn't be paid more 30% of your income towards your housing costs. But that does tend to depend on the number of people you have in your household and what size bedrooms you are renting out. And so this is a little bit of a chart, and you can see where our rents are capped based on different affordability levels. That could be 30, 50, 60, 80, and then what size of the unit it is itself. So that's what we do, is we look at the, every year we reestablish this rent chart, and that's the most you can charge. So one of the things, when we talk about our bond opportunity solicitation, I just wanted to start off with, it took an incredible amount of systems alignment and partnering with Multnomah County, the Joint Office, Prosper Portland, Home Forward, which is the housing authority for Multnomah County. And we needed to really understand what all the resources were coming in to be leveraged with the bond in order for us to set the goals that we established with the voters. The real fun was, how does that work within an actual solicitation? So how do we ensure that we're meeting everyone's various goals and desires and priorities? And how did we put this into one single solicitation? So that's essentially what we did. This gives you a sense of the various pots of money that we put into a single solicitation. And we had to ensure that how we wrote it up made sense for each of those funding partners. But it really was a way to leverage our resources in ways that we really made sense for those particular projects. So we were able to bring in capital costs, as well as operating subsidy, and as well as support services into a single solicitation, which is rarely done. But the whole idea is that when our developers were applying to the funds, it was really ready to go kind of funding. So they didn't have to necessarily wait the extra 1 to 2, 3 years to be competitive in trying to find other resources. We had done the heavy lifting as the city to go to those funding partners first and say, hey, let's do this together. And it really, really paid off. We think we shaved off probably at least a year of time. In terms of our overall timeline, I don't want to daunt you guys too much, but it did take us 9 months total from start to finish. This first couple months really we did an incredible amount of community engagement. We went to all our stakeholder groups. We talked to our development partners, and we went to all of our contractors. We did a meet and greet with those who are providing technical assistance for DMWSB co-bids, as well as those who are going to be, we knew they were going to be going in and probably applying for funds. So we did some of that early work. We had to really understand each funder commitments going in. And then it took, it was about a 40-page document. Sorry, Katie. No, it was 30 or 40 pages of a narrative in addition to exhibits. And that was a couple months worth of time. And then we did, and then we gave folks a couple months to respond, and then it took us about 2 months to actually select the projects. We went through a full process. We went through it. We did also require part of the our solicitation was a submission of an equity plan, really looking at a comprehensive equity plan, everything from staff and board composition to how you're doing outreach to ensure that you're getting to populations that have disproportionately not been able to get into housing. We really looked more deeply at actual screening criteria. I think that kind of that surprised some of the developers. Weren't ready for that level of scrutiny, but we really wanted to make sure that we were being as much culturally responsive, and that those developers were really taking into account the who the folks were going to be housed in terms of the design and other decisions, and then of course making sure they could meet the DMWSB SDV contracting utilization goal. We ended up with a two-part evaluation process, 2 different committees, and this really worked well. So this was something what we learned is an individual person can only absorb so much as you're reviewing all those proposals. So each proposal, you get a binder and you're getting quite a bit of information, and at some point you just stop being objective. You stop being able to really look through and look through all the criteria in a way that's felt fair to each of the proposers. So we ended up capping each of the committees to just 8 proposals. And what we started doing was we started off with a technical and feasibility review, and that was really ensuring that the funders who were involved in the project were able to identify what was important to them and understand what was really feasible from a project perspective, and that's looking at performance, it's looking at long-term viability. Are you going to meet the green building goals? Are you going to meet the DMWSB goals? And it was really more of a, are you viable, or are you not as viable? And then the community review committee was we involved our oversight committee members, we involved outside stakeholders, and they were able to, we also involved participants in the city's minority evaluator program, and then those folks, we really looked at criteria. I'll get to that in a second. Different criteria, but how is the equity plan looking? How are you looking at being responsive to the needs of those who are chronically homeless? More of the pieces of the work that prioritized other kinds of values for us as building affordable housing.
Did this review happen in parallel or sequential?
It was sequential.
Okay.
So it was something that if the project couldn't work as a project, it was viewed as needing additional questions as part of the interview process. So the results of the technical committee were delivered to the community review committee. And it really was the basis for more in-depth questioning. And when the community review folks did the interviews and did the additional questioning of those teams.
And it looks like Maria and Ranfis both have questions. I would like to ask, though, in the interest of time, because we got started a little late and because we do have other folks who came to talk to you tonight, that we limit to clarifying questions, and then I'll just ask Molly if she'll kind of stay up here during the Q&A part for the panel as well. So do you have a clarifying question, Megan? It's additional information. Oh, okay. Okay. If you wouldn't mind holding it, that would be great.
Clarifying question. So it sounds like there was a community review process. In that review process, did everyone get to sort of review everything, or was it sort of, here's your specific section? So for like, I saw like the minority evaluator position. So were they specifically tasked on evaluating like workforce and contract equity? Did everyone else get to score the same or evaluate the same thing? I guess trying to understand. And sorry, and just and then clarifying question, is evaluating the same thing as scoring the application?
Really great question. So the the committee members scored in its entirety. So they had to look at this criteria that we laid out. So requirements, preferences, equity plan, project feasibility, qualifications, service plan, performa, budgets, and then schedule. So, but everyone brings different expertise to the table, and we expect them to deploy their expertise. And we really were careful of making sure we had a diverse set of perspectives on those committees. We really looked at balance of gender and race, and we looked at different types of professional experience as well. So we were able to have like one person really understand there's gonna, you know, the numbers piece of those projects, but other folks making sure we had our who really were more steeped in equity principles than, say, staff were. It was really important that we had their perspectives on those committees, and we really had a blend. And then we did ask people, speak up and provide that discussion to the group. But yes, so, and then your last question, we didn't end up actually with the score, we ended up with a ranked list. So those were being deemed more responsive to least responsive. And ultimately for us, it was we only have so much money, and we'll fund up until we have the resources to deploy, as long as you're considered, you know, responsive and meeting the goals of the solicitation. Just last slide real fast. Oh, that was the last slide. Okay.
No.
So that was,
Thank you very much, Molly. And if you, so I'm now going to invite the folks who are going to, from the audience, who are sitting in the audience, who have come here tonight to talk to you from PCRI, Proud Ground, and Innovative Housing, Inc. I'm not sure if anyone from the Community Alliance of Tenants was able to make it, but if so, if you could come up also, and Sam and I will just kind of move to the side here. Yep. We have an extra cordless mic, and we can kind of hand it. Well, that's just weird. We have to come sit back. Okay. So as with other panels, we just asked everybody to kind of come with 10 minutes, a 10-minute intro to just give you a little bit of an idea who they are, what their organization does, and some kind of at a high level where the kind of areas of impact in terms of greenhouse gas reduction and providing equitable social benefit. So I think we can probably just maybe start at that end of the table and move in this direction. So Sarah, if you want to go ahead and start, would you like the cordless, or does that work?
I just turn it on?
Yep.
And then that's good enough? Okay, so I am the executive director at Innovative Housing. I am not the developer, but I'm here to give a broad overview of some of our development work. Innovative Housing owns and operates about 1,000 affordable rental units in the Portland region. Magnolia Apartments just down the road is an example of that, and we're opening up Meg 2 right now, so we'll have about 100 units. As an example of some of our work, Meg is LEED certified. We typically do Earth Advantage. We don't usually go with LEED certification, but we definitely are incorporating a lot of different green building strategies into all of our work. And that's for a couple of reasons. You know, one, we want to reduce our impact. That's obviously a goal. Our funders care very much about this, so we have to do it in order to get money. We want our residents to have healthy homes, so that's very important. And then it also really helps with operating costs. Our margins are very tight on operations, so anything we can do to reduce cost for us, or if our tenants are paying the utilities, that's all good. So that's what we're looking at. We often start a project with a lot of different green building elements in it, or things that would improve efficiency, reduce impact. And then as we go through the process of developing, and Faith is smiling here, you have to value engineer, which means you have to cut your budget. So once we lock in all of our funding sources, which as Molly explained, they're usually multiple sources, they're very complicated budgets. It takes years to assemble them all, and then it's done. So when the costs go up, as the DD set comes in and the final drawings come in and things get going, we don't have a lot of flexibility to just keep adding. So we have to start cutting. And often what gets cut is the optional stuff, which is the solar panels, you know, the gray water recycling systems, the things that we would be really excited about trying that we often cannot incorporate. So we are, like our staff, and we are all really excited about a potential source that would help us keep those things as a priority within the project, you know, because basics are basics. You have to have the bedrooms, the windows, the heat. There's a lot of things we can't cut. And if there were a funding source that prioritized all these other great things that could not be cut, it would just allow us to do a lot more. I asked some of our staff, like I said, we have about 1,000 units, and we could make upgrades to make the buildings more efficient. We're looking at, you know, we could add solar panels, we could add water savings measures. We're right now looking at repaving probably 1.5 acres of a parking lot, and it's just going to be acres of asphalt, and it kills me because, you know, we'd rather do permeable pavers or something like that. I don't know if that's within the scope of what we're talking about here, but the incremental cost increase just makes that not optional for us. Also, insulated windows and things like that, when we're replacing windows, it'd be great if we could go with higher insulation values. It would be better for residents and for the building. I have like ideas of things we could also incorporate into bigger projects, not the operations side, but you know, when we do a lot of historic rehab, we also do just some acquisition rehab, and then we do new construction as well. And there's a whole range of things that we would love to incorporate, and I'm not going to go down that list, but you know, things that also that we don't even think about, because right now the development teams, there's kind of a formula for how you do affordable housing development. It's hard enough as it is, and it's fairly fixed in what we can and cannot include. But if we could bring different consultants and people, you know, who know things that our regular MEP subs don't typically talk about, like, I think somebody in Portland did a geothermal building once, but, you know, we're always like, why don't we do that? Well, we don't even have it at the table to talk about it. And I remember one time we tried to bring in like a gray water recycling system, and, you know, our subs were just like, oh, that won't work. The detergent clogs up the filters and you'll never be able to maintain it. So there's all sorts of reasons that a lot of things won't work. But if we had, you know, a prioritized, if we could keep that priority on the funding and the goal there, I think we could bring more ideas and more people to the table. So we're all really excited about just the new ideas that we could bring to it. I guess I wanted to say a couple things, and we can get to this in the Q&A. But because we're going through so many rounds of competitive funding applications, it's great if somebody is willing to be first in. So I don't know if you guys are considering, you know, being like an early funder, or if you want to look at projects that are fully funded and then your piece would just be the last piece. Different funders take different approaches to that. And I guess I would encourage you to consider being an early funder or a first in. You can make your funding conditional. You know, if we don't get the city, the state, the grant funds that make everything whole, we wouldn't use your money. But oftentimes funders require that the project not have a lot of contingent capital sources in order to be eligible. And that can be challenging, just given the timing of all the different funding sources. I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you very much.
Hello and good evening. My name is Kimberly Horner, and I am the newly hired Executive Director for the Portland Community Reinvestment Initiative. I am originally from California, and now I'm here in Portland. Tonight I have brought two of my staff members that are really more experts in this subject matter than I. So to my right is Charles Funches, who's been with the organization for several years. And then in the audience as well is Susan Voudray, who works on our many of our programs, including our IDA program, PCEF, in addition to getting people signed up for homeownership. And what I'd like to do is just read a little bit of a statement about why we think this is very important. As many of you know, PCRI is that organization that is largely representing the Black community in getting people back to the northeast section of Portland. Many of our residents are at-risk people, just based on some of the things that they've been up against in the policies that were adopted here in Portland that have negatively impacted our population. As a result of that, some of our family members have left this area and are returning back, and our goal is to make sure that we are able to keep people in their homes. What that means is not only providing new housing opportunities, but also keeping people in properties that they currently own or in properties that they rent from PCRI. Having said that, PCRI has begun undertaking our project intentionally, including environmental justice and energy, water resource efficiencies in our homes. Historically, the Black population is the hardest hit from environmental inequities. For instance, the Black population often lives in older, less insulated properties, causing greater utility bills. Low-income residents, especially renters, have not been able to access incentives for green options such as solar, roof window insulation, and energy-efficient appliances. These green initiatives or incentives also continue to pay the people who can afford them by giving them utility savings throughout the life of the product. PCRI understands that by improving efficiencies of our homes and appliances in our homes, we also can reverse some of this environmental injustice. Some of the components we begin to add and will continue to add with our Pathway 1000 program includes installing solar panels when possible, making all of our roofs solar ready, using Earth Advantage certification to verify our attention to green systems and building practices. Additionally, we are purchasing Energy Star appliances, tankless water heaters, and installing bike parking and bringing new innovations in water and heating systems. We understand that these innovations will not only improve the quality of life for our participants, but will also reduce the impacts on the planet. These types of programs that can be offered through PCEF are also great programs to help with workforce development. Again, to my right is Charles Funches, who works in our housing development side of what we do, in addition to economic development. He too will have some words that he would like to share, but in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to Diane. But this is very important to us and to our residents as well. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Diane Lynn from Proud Ground, and it's an honor to join all of you, this wonderful new fund we have here in Portland, and my extraordinary colleagues to explain briefly what we do at Proud Ground. It's not an entirely descriptive title, but what we are is one of the nation's largest community land trusts in the country and largest in the Pacific Northwest. We have over 350 homes in our portfolio, and we're on schedule to bring in as many as 500 in the next 2 years or so. So the way our program works is that we create permanently affordable homeownership opportunities for working families. Our target audience is generally around 60% of median income, and we hold those units of housing and affordability in perpetuity. And the way we do that is by bringing the gap between the subsidy between what people can actually afford in a mortgage and what it actually costs to either build or buy. And we hold those resources in the unit and serve family after family in the future. At the same time, those families build equity without having to bring a down payment to the table, which is one of the biggest barriers for most working families. So the Community Land Trust is a very unique model, and we're very proud to work in partnership with PCRI and the other culturally specific agencies, and especially right now we're working really shoulder to shoulder with Habitat for Humanity Portland Metro East, so all of their new homes this year are coming into our permanently affordable portfolio, and those homes will never be sold on the open market again, because every time that happens, we lose all the investment made in those homes, and families into the future lose that opportunity. Just so it's clear, really equity building for these families is very important, and based on our criteria and our data today, in 10 years' time, a family, without having to bring a down payment and having a mortgage at a level they can honestly afford, can make up to about $80,000 in 10 years' time, and still we can turn around and sell that home to a 50% median income family. That's how the market's working. So we're building a condo project, and along with PCRI and Habitat, we've worked for the last four years plus on the North-Northeast housing strategy. We've been in this room talking to the Oversight Committee many times. 64 units, 40 of which will be permanently affordable, and targeted at, again, with Habitat's extraordinary help and Portland Housing Bureau's commitment, and actually it's really their project, we're their implementation team. Very much, it's really, yeah, it's all, we're all doing it together. And it's the first of its kind of its size, and we do have all the layering that Sarah referenced in on this project, including one of the first largest lift projects. That's a state bond fund amount that's going into the project. And we've worked with Earth Advantage on this to be sure that we meet the criteria for, I think it's platinum Earth Advantage for the project. Let's just say hypothetically, if we were able to, there's two kind of routes we'd like to take with the Clean Energy Fund. One is for the single family homes we have in our portfolio, is we'd really like, and we will be requesting support to just put more solar panels. We have a great partnership with a group called Solar for All, and we've already put solar panels on homes free of charge to the lower income families, and that's been working well, although again, the resources are pretty limited. This fund may give us an opportunity to literally match many more solar panel opportunities to families, and we already have a systematic way to do that. We'd like to look at Water Bureau conservation efforts and come up with some creative approaches, and we'll be approaching all of you about that. There are some opportunities to make some changes to the 50/20 condo building, and by the way, this is on Interstate and Alberta. As Kimberly mentioned, this is targeted to preference policy families with historical ties to Northeast Portland. The 40 units will go to those families and only those families, to give people a chance to come back to this neighborhood and reconnect and anchor their children and community. And again, the units will be sold over and over again at an affordable level. So there's several things Earth Advantages has given us an opportunity to really look at some things we could apply for that could really enhance the building. And again, we're creating a model. It's on the light rail line. Really all of our homes have to meet a criteria of energy efficiency. And any way we can make them more energy efficient, more cost effective to our buyers and the families that end up living in the homes, the better. So that's a commitment of ours and an important value. It's very important that we attempt every single way we can to maybe apply for funds that can support the energy efficiency of new homes and do a better job, especially when we're talking about permanent affordability, to have that durability and that energy efficiency for the long haul. And with families that are living, the Habitat families we're working with and the families at 60% of median income, they're just, half of the families that are in our homes in our portfolio now are people of color, and 3/4 of our wait list are people of color. So we're really targeting families that have been left out, and these are families that really need support to create these energy efficiency options. And we'll be really on a mission to explain all that in an effort to partner with you into the future, because I know that the city, Portland, is really looking to serve more people of color and lower income families with these energy efficiency options, and we want to be there to help connect. I think one of the challenges at the state level is that there's the definition of low income, how you're trying to target them needs to be defined, and the partners you see here tonight can help do that. We don't want to argue the point about exact AMIs or whatever. If they're in regulated affordable housing in any way funded through these sources, they should qualify, and they should be supported to thrive into the future and not kicked out of the program as they do better and better, as affordable home ownership can provide such stability for families and their children. So I'll leave it there and look forward to your questions, input from other members.
Thank you all for coming and sharing your expertise and giving your time on the evening. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to open it up to the committee for questions. Megan, I don't know if you retained the question from earlier, but now would be the time for it. No, it's okay. 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 Are there any questions from the committee? Brandfeast?
Yeah, I have a question. Sorry. So I think maybe I heard this a couple times, but it sounded like it was, well, I guess it's using it in the slide earlier as well. It sounds like it's really important for this committee to consider the timing of funding, as well as being clear what type of funder we could be, whether we're an early project funder or much further down the road. But I guess my question, well, I'll try to avoid doing a two-part question, but I guess my one question would be, given the constraints, I guess what are the risks if we were an early funder, given, I think the explanation I heard earlier that sometimes, you know, you aspire for the most, but sometimes cuts are having to be made. And I know for some of the goals, like for around energy efficiency or reducing greenhouse gas emissions, having solar, if that's something that's oftentimes on the chopping block, how could PCEF be structured to avoid those potential risks if PCEF were to be structured to be an early funder, if you will?
Jim?
Yeah.
I guess my hope was that by locking the funding to the requirement that those pieces stay in the project, we could all make sure they stay in. So I don't think there would be much risk. I think some of the risk for the funders, especially like if there's time-sensitive funding, like with the bond money, it had to get out and spent in a certain amount of time. So for example, the city didn't want to allocate millions of dollars to a project that still needed to get millions more from multiple sources, so they might not actually ever build the project, and then they'd be stuck with the money they tried to spend, not spent. I think if you had smaller amounts and you tied them to the elements that we said we would include in the project, kind of following maybe the historic tax credit model, for example. You know, not exactly that model, but if we're doing a historic preservation and we say we have to preserve these windows because they are, you know, historically significant, no matter what else gets cut in the project, we can't cut that piece because that's where the historic tax credits came in. So I don't think there'd be a lot of risk to PCEF by allocating funds as long as you conditioned it on the uses. And one thing I didn't mention before, I don't know how often you're thinking of doing funding cycles, but like twice a year, I think would be great. You know, just my 2 cents.
You can use this one if you like.
Sure. I could see there being a little bit of a slightly different strategy for rehab projects versus new construction. And there could be something where, you know, for like new construction, as we're having to rely on significant amount of capital resources, you know, my goal is to have at least an annual solicitation for capital resources for affordable housing. So within that, it makes sense to, as much as we can, provide assuage some of the risk of our developers to get as much of the commitments early on, so then the projects can proceed as quickly as possible. Now, rehab of projects, that could be something that might be a slightly different cycle. That could be something that could be done that doesn't necessarily mean you need to bring in low-income housing tax credits per se. Doesn't mean you have to go and change ownership structures. So that's just something, especially for, let's say, low-income homeowners, that could be potentially a carve-out or a pot that that these groups can be immediately responsive to. So just a different, just maybe slightly different strategies depending on the outcome.
Yeah, I would like to, this is Charles, PCRI. I would like to second that because I can say that as hands-on with our clients and knowing their current situations about energy efficiency, when we try to get our projects completely funded, just having allocation of those funds set aside per project will be very instrumental. So we're not having to try to find resources that will encumber us getting the project completed, particularly on our preservation of our scatter site properties as well. We have a lot of households that would definitely need upgrades and retrograding to their properties, and just knowing that we have funds specific to project would be very instrumental in this process. So least amount of encumbrances to this process will be greatly appreciated.
And let me do a quick wrap up to emphasize it again. What we're doing in these big developments is so complicated, and it's so challenging to have all these different funders involved right now, and we're right in the throes of our closing process. If the fund can get in early and be specified, as Sarah said, and others for specific things, the probability of it happening is just so much higher. And if it can be a pretty straightforward process, we understand the importance of accountability of public funds. I used to be, a public budgeter in the past, and you have to keep an eye on every single penny and we're not asking for complete flexibility, but simplicity is a big value when you're talking about the layers of funding many of us have to juggle to make these projects work. Molly is completely right when you're talking about a simple single homeowner. It's kind of no muss, no fuss. Let us apply, and let us apply those resources directly to the people we can work with on the spot. It doesn't have to be a big complicated process in terms of as it relates to single family homes compared to the big development projects. So that can be on a different cycle, and we can get it out the door much faster and much more efficiently. It'd be nice to decouple those if at all possible.
Hi, thank you for your discussions. I have two questions that are related, but they're distinct questions. So one, was it Charles? Your colleague mentioned you were going to talk, you could say some things about workforce development and the connections between these, so I'd like to hear about that. And my second question is about the strategies you all have to make sure any cost savings from retrofitting and from insulation and green projects are passed on, so that, because it sounded like the rent is like rent minus utilities, and like, how is it that the cost savings would be accrued by the renters in these situations rather than, I mean, no offense, but you all, or the property owners if that's not you, but the actual people living in it?
Okay. As far as the workforce development piece, that's part two of my responsibilities is economic development. One of the things that I've encountered, again, being boots on the ground and hands-on with our clients, is that a lot of our women and minority and disadvantaged business owners, quite frankly, are very eager, to get into the green technologies. They are looking for organizations to kind of support those initiatives. So for me, coming across PCEF, quite frankly, it's amazing. I think it's a great program from what I can see here, how it's allocated based off of your flyer that you guys provided. Green infrastructure, workforce development, clean energy programs, and innovation. I think that's what we're going to see with our particular initiative with workforce development. I've been in communication with a number of trades that are interested in not only our preservation projects, but also our new construction projects, and just knowing that there's a resource that we can plug into. I mean, we can quantify jobs created, lives changed, access to home ownership, wealth building. We can show a real cascading effect of if we have the right amount of dollars at the right time in a project plugged in with specific contractors that are on board and they understand this, we will see citywide benefits to not only the households but to our community at large. So again, talking to these contractors and asking them, what is it that you need to pay living wage jobs and so on. They've provided all of the details. They just are looking for someone to come with a viable financing source that can support that. And we can see it, really the benefits going from now into the foreseeable future, quite frankly. Portland is still growing. Still lots of opportunities for housing across the board. And again, minority and women and disadvantaged contractors are eager to plug into this process. So if we have the resources, we can show them the way and give you great results as a result of us plugging those dollars into those programs. So hope that answers the question.
I'll take on the second one because it's very straightforward as it relates to homeownership. The savings goes right into the pocket of those homeowners. We do a front-end ratio calculation of affordability based on our funders and our lenders. Habitat is 30% of the family's income goes into all of their home ownership needs, mortgage, insurance, taxes if there are taxes, fees. And ours is the same way at 38% for people at above 60% of median income. When there's cost savings that come from energy efficiency, that goes right into the pockets of those homeowners, and it strengthens their position and helps, again, maintain the homes. Really increases the value of the home for future sales and for the benefit of future families. We're working on a modular project that's high energy efficiency that we're trying to, for the first time, calculate those savings into the front-end ratio. That's an innovation through the Million Months of Affordability through MMT. So we're exploring all of that, but savings goes direct.
Well, sure. Well, no, just as the multifamily kind of rep, I can't say that exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's kind of the disconnect between some of these things. Typically, renters in a lot of our buildings, they'll pay their own electricity, so savings around that goes directly to residents. But even where we have sub-metered out water and sewer, thinking that we're going to pass that down to residents, we have turned that around and brought it back because it doesn't work very well for the buildings. So for a lot of those savings, it's not going to flow directly to residents. I guess I would say, though, that, the buildings themselves also need to be financially healthy, and there is a benefit to residents for that. So it's not as if there aren't indirect benefits to folks when our utility costs are lower for operations. And I was going to say one other thing. I mean, the training piece, I mean, it's huge, and we've already been talking to lots of community partners. There's a lot of energy around, how we could use and incorporate training in operations of our buildings, not just, on the construction technology, the front end side of it, but we are looking to create a maintenance training program so that people can help maintain a lot of these more complicated systems within our buildings. And we would, love to plug in for that too.
Yeah,
I was also going to mention, not only do we look at the health of the actual property, but we look at the health impacts to the people that live in our properties. So if we can plug in dollars that improve air quality, we know that the African American community typically is that community that has higher rates of asthma and other health-related conditions. So when we talk about improving energy efficiencies to these properties and air quality, water quality, those are all things that impact people's actual lives too. So I just want to make sure that we look at it from a holistic perspective as well.
very well said. The only thing I would add is that affordable housing is a little bit different than market rate housing, is that it becomes it's a net sum game. The investments we put in the housing, whatever the money comes back out in terms of cash flow is highly restricted, and he's either paying back off really actually either the city debt or is going very minimum. There's no profit to be made in affordable housing, just to be blunt. It's a very restricted set of provisions we put on any sort of cash. So that being said, the owners do have a choice. They have a choice of what of those utilities they pay themselves, the property pays for, and what it gets passed on to the tenant. And there's different rationales, either approach. You want to curb consumption. You're trying to look at those other components around behavior, but really the investments need a life cycle analysis and high environmental and quality of life impacts is what we're really going after. So it's so I just don't think it's the same hopefully the same kind of fear around a private landlord where they would just be able to pocket the money.
There were two slides in the PHB presentation that really stuck out to me. I'm really curious to know a little bit more about who is being served and who needs to be served by housing programs at the local level. For example, as we're seeing safety nets disappear, for example, at the federal level, how do we be more responsive at the local level for those who are highly dependent on safety net programs? I saw the slide that showed that people who are dependent on Social Security or who have the lowest AMI or on disabilities, how do we ensure that they are benefiting specifically from affordable housing programs, and that people from certain racial and ethnic backgrounds and those who are most at risk are being served well by affordable housing programs? So my question specifically is about what indicators have you seen as you implement programs that tell you that the priority communities are being housed? And can you tell a little bit of that story so we can envision who we should think about as PCEF has to prioritize some of those people?
Does anyone want to?
Okay. I think you're absolutely right. The greatest need are the folks with a disability who need to age and are aging in home, but don't have all the supports. And their Social Security benefits are roughly equal to about $800 something right now. That can really get I mean, I don't know where you can find a place for that. The best thing in the grand scheme of things for folks extremely low income is they need rent support. They actually need rent assistance. In general, what we need to see ideally is an expansion of our subsidy programs where people are paying only a portion of their income towards rent and utilities. That can make the biggest impact of immediately housing people who may not even have income at all. And we can work with those households to get them income over time or benefits over time. But those are the folks who are out in the streets, and those are the folks that we're underserving. In terms of how we look at indicators and how we're serving priority populations, we are looking far more comprehensively at demographics than we have been before. There's been, so part of the Joint Office of Support Homeless Services, and through their investments and support services, is really trying to better understand the clinical and case management needs of those populations. They really need those supports in order to stay in housing. That's where we've really learned that the hard way, and that sometimes, frankly, having affordable rent is just not enough. People really do need other connections to a variety of different services, and those to be able to be responsive to those various needs. People are having mental health crises. People are having other kinds of issues that the best thing we can do is actually bring those services to their homes. And that's the best part of having place-based kind of subsidies, and you can bring all leveraging those places so people can stay in their homes as they're getting and working out other issues that they may have. I'm sure other people.
PCRI has been around for over 27 years. It is that organization that has weathered the storm. Through the recession, other Community Development Commission agencies actually turned their portfolios over to PCRI when they couldn't make it through the recession. So currently we have about 900 units. Of those 900 units, about 300 are single-family units. In addition to that, we are about to finish construction on what we call King Plus Parks, which should add an additional 50 to 60 units to our portfolio. So in total, we'll probably have about 900. We're also looking at doing what we call Pathway 1000, where we plan on building 100 units a year in order to get more people in homes and more people into home ownership programs. PCRI has a very robust program. We have our own housing development team. We have our own human resources department, a finance department. We've got property management that we do on our own. We also contract out to do property management. We have other agencies that would like for us to contract to do their property management. We have our own maintenance team. I could go on with the programs that we have, but one of our largest programs is through our resident services, and they are the folks that are really boots on the ground with the people that live in our properties, that help them get the wraparound services that they need, that help them get into homeownership programs, that really teach our residents about what it is to save in a meaningful way so that they can purchase a home, or even just take that money and save so that they can go on to college. So that being said, there are agencies out there like PCRI that really are providing all of those services that are meeting the needs of the city of Portland, the state of Oregon, and what the federal government expects for cities to do in terms of providing affordable housing for people that are at risk.
Well, I was just going to do a quick chime check. It is 7:37, so we have about 20 minutes left. And I would just wanted to, but if there was something quick to add, and then go to Shanice's question.
Okay, I was just going to add that I think all of us we're all working relatively similarly. I failed to mention our resident services program. We all add that. I think that's where we add the mission value to a lot of our affordable housing. But as far as helping people access it, we got to get more units on the ground. We all know that. We're ramping up production as fast as we can. We're reducing screening criteria. I think what you see in a lot of nonprofit owners and operators is that we try to reduce barriers. So, we incorporate universal appeals. The city is making all those changes very soon across the whole board, but we have all done that, I think, historically. So you have to do that. Housing has been such a bastion of inequity that we kind of have to make extra efforts to increase access. And I think we do that. And then we all measure demographics, so we know exactly who we're serving, where we're coming up short, where we need to put more energy. I think we're all paying a lot of attention to that right now.
One thing I want to bring up is that it really boils down to the individual homeowner or renter. Someone's at 30 to 60% AMI. Having utility bills that are variable and typically trending in the upwards of increasing on an annual basis is very detrimental for those households. So for us as developers for affordable housing, we can monetize everything that we see in our projects, but quite frankly, the clients that are impacted, a utility bill that I just recently looked at, $200, for someone who's at a 30 or 40, even if we're covering it, the benefits are real. We can see the benefit as the property owner, the client will see the benefit, and those small, however small they may be for us, for them, it's a big difference. It's a matter of the economics of purchasing groceries, paying for transportation for a medical appointment. It's really down to that. And it's great for us on the development side. When we walk out of our offices and we go out and meet with our clients, we can actually ask these questions, and they're honest with us, and they're looking for solutions. So again, PCEF, I'm very excited about this. I think this is going to make a very major impact for years to come. So again, the process should be streamlined and accessible, and we should all be able to dialogue and have a real clear and concise communication about how this should go and how funds are deployed to make sure that those folks who are at that lower end definitely can see the benefits moving forward, because it's real for them.
Thank you. Shanice?
Thanks, folks. This was a really insightful both panel and presentation, and I think there are a lot of things I'm sitting with and wanted to lift up. I think some of the focus or work that has happened around just community engagement that was shared in the earlier presentation, and I think I'm thinking around or wanting to double tap at a later time potentially on what it might look like to explore a question that Ron Feast maybe brought earlier too, but the contracting. I'm curious about the scope of the work that they might be thinking of, and especially how we might look at the lessons learned and the journey you all took as we're thinking about equity in that process, both with contractors and recognizing a person of color and who might be in that workforce that we are contracting with a particular person for might not look the same just because of that, and unpacking the reality of our region and sort of what that looks like. But ultimately, there's in my head, as we're talking about housing, access, and justice really for our renters in this conversation, recognizing who they are. I'm curious about developers and what feels like best practice to pull folks into a conversation, especially with affordable housing. There isn't that gain, if you will, in the same way, or profit for folks to participate. And I think that that nuance of who has access to certain kinds of benefits and what that looks like on the front end to do that work and pull in folks who might be harder to get to the table, quote unquote, I think is something that is worth exploring. And ultimately that pipeline, right, to what I perceive Proud Ground doing, really holding up that space for home buying and home ownership for our communities, especially in connection with you all at this table. But the space of building the pipeline I'm thinking of for AMI, right, the median income of our folks, our renters, what that looks like, creating these opportunities that are high leverage for the fund. I'm curious about what land trusts or what things might look like that do the work of eventually building that pipeline to home ownership that might look, I think, have a new possibility with this funding source. And so those are kind of just questions, a few that I'm sitting with, that ultimately I think that link between some considerations for our renters along the way, I'm still sitting with and would love to continue engaging with you all to learn about your work.
I'm going to see if I can address just quickly a couple points that you made, because I think that was so full with a lot of thoughts and a lot of great ideas. The pipeline for people getting into homeownership really, we've got an entire continuum of affordable housing needs, from people making absolutely no money, zero, all the way up to workforce housing for people that are working really hard every day, maybe even up to 100%, and cannot afford any reasonable options in the city of Portland or beyond. So the pipeline, we're finding that people are in subsidized rental units that over time have actually income qualified out, but there's no place for them to go. Through Habitat and through our targeted partnerships with different agencies, we're really looking to give people a chance, and a lot of refugee and immigrant families are taking advantage of this because they don't have to meet the criteria of conventional lenders as much, especially through Habitat. So we're really linking people that are in subsidized rentals into home ownership, thus releasing yet another unit of housing that's really critical maybe for someone else coming up out of, recovery or domestic violence, or in a critical transition in their life that they can stabilize in. So I think a lot of us have been involved in Housing Oregon for a while, the Housing Alliance, to advocate for the entire continuum. I may be here representing our work in home ownership, but we really stand together in our efforts to kind of work across the entire continuum to make sure we're helping people, get on that path. A quick final point about your, how do we get people involved in the workforce development? Other people work in this more intensely than I do, but I would say that our 50/20 condo project has a 30% involvement with minority and women-owned businesses, and making sure that our contractors are people in the community that represent and reflect the community. Our owner's rep is Gina Woolley, who's been in the community for over 48 years and is my right-hand person on this project. And having those folks involved every step of the way is just a crucial part. Ultimately, for the Community Land Trust, once a family buys a home and becomes a member of the Land Trust, they could serve on the board. They have ownership, they have decision-making opportunities as a member of the Community Land Trust. And there's an extraordinary history behind all that I'd be happy to share at a later date.
I just want to make one comment to a word you used, which was pipeline. And I immediately started thinking about sustainability. How do we build capacity? How do we scale up to meet the need as industry partners? Predictability. And I think as much as we can create some predictability and sustainability for our development partners, I think that's a really good role we can play. There's a lot of work that goes into creating a real estate plan and delivering on it. They just need to know when we're in and when we're not. So thinking about, maybe it takes us like an extra 2 months to think about that right strategy, but you're leveraging and you're bringing in those resources that make the most sense for those projects. And you can create that predictable stream in a manner that people know that we can be relied upon. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you. I'm still thinking about tenant standards and protections, and I wish we had a chance to engage with community alliance of tenants. But I guess I think for the panel, a question, we are working with limited resources, and I'm sort of thinking about how do we rate developers, or how do we make sure that what are good ways to sort of evaluate the quality of a developer or reward high road developers, assuming that not all developers are the same, but in terms of like how do we get sort of continue to hit all these sort of goals that we have around workforce, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and really serving disproportionately impacted communities. Just kind of curious if there's any thoughts from the panel around how we as a committee could structure something that rewards those good, honest developers or nonprofit developers.
We reach out to NAMAC, which is the National Association of Minority Contractors, as that body that can provide us with referrals to very qualified contractors and the like. In addition to that, we also make recommendations to NAMAC about qualified and quality contractors. So that is one of the areas where I think as this group of people that are representing PCEF can use that entity as an entity to reach out to hear what you need to hear about the type of developers and contractors that are really producing housing here in this area. For the most part, we're very comfortable with the competency of the developers or the housing constructors, the builders that we're using, and we can make recommendations to the group if you ever need to have that. But there are organizations that can help provide that information.
I think I would just maybe ask a little bit more around where you guys are wanting to evaluate certain proposals and projects. And I certainly know with experience with the bond solicitation, we didn't certainly need all of our committee members to be experts in multifamily development, but we had to have that. We need to rely on those experts who did know that kind of work, who look at track records, who will work day in and day out. So it was really a blend of folks who have steep knowledge and have been working in the field for a long time to understand what is actually a viable project, because we knew that wasn't going to be something we could just ask our oversight committee to just be able to know from projects. We have 40 projects in our pipeline right now, so we can looking at comparisons, and we can look at track records of certain teams that work really well together. So we were able to bring that information to bear to those sort of committees. So that's where sort of maybe as this committee better understands sort of the role of the role of staff versus the role of the selection committee, looking at sort of criteria. When do you maybe rely on your, your housing partners to help look at sort of a portion of it? It may end up being what you guys end up funding.
Yeah, one thing to keep in perspective, affordable housing from a developer standpoint is much more stringent and much more legally intensive comparative to traditional construction when it comes to housing. So our partner with PHB has been very instrumental, at least with a lot of our projects, and actually helping us have due diligence and oversight. So if you're looking for a collective sense of what's viable and what's not, our partner PHB, as well as our collective group here, can answer that and provide guidance and some insight on that if you need further information.
Sort of. I think it's a longer conversation. I think I'd love to sort of pick, how it sounds like what I'm hearing is there's at least a reliance on experts to sort of help vet the process. I guess my question for a deeper dialogue is like, okay, what do those experts actually look for? Are there ways to sort of extrapolate that into some actual clear criterias that are able to be evaluated? So I think that's more, similar to how most scoring or validative criteria is you sort of take sort of what experts typically look at and sort of quantify that and provide ways. I'm just more curious, but that sounds like more of a follow-up question, but or conversation. But I'm thankful for some of the already feedback given so far.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, until you develop your own track record, because obviously, the first couple rounds, you won't have the experience with the applicants, but you'll start to develop your own track record, and you can gauge whether people do what they say they can do. But there are some other objective criteria. If you think about, who do you want the funds to benefit, it's documentable, who we're housing, who are the people that live in the building that's applying for the funds. How has that owner done on compliance? What's that owner's track record on MWESB achievements and utilization rates? There are ways to try to quantify what people really do, and what their track records are.
And if I could add one more quick point, I mean, we wouldn't be doing the project we're doing without PHB. And they're already your kind of partner. I'm glad, Molly's here tonight to tell you what they do and how they do it, because you don't have to replicate what they do. Our projects, at least one we're working on, are predicated on their very diligent oversight. So I think, as Sarah said, you're going to build your own track record in terms of how we all do with getting done what you hope we will.
Yeah, thank you. I think where I'm sort of coming from is just sort of hearing, and I guess it's more important for me to verify, but just sort of anecdotal stories around, just the quality of some of our affordable units are very different from building to building. I think that's a reality, and I think as we think about the construction of energy efficiency projects, solar, I think quality is really important. Making sure we're delivering that quality to tenants is really important. But I think that's a longer conversation. But thank you all so much for being here.
Okay, we are coming up on 8 o'clock, but Andrea has a question. Then I don't know if Faith, you wanted to kind of, after they answer, do a little bit of a wrap up, and then we'll go into work session. Andrea.
I know this could be a long answer, but I'll ask you to keep it short in the spirit of time. I'd love to know from each of you, we've had a lot of different solicitation ideas come up in the last hour. If you could create the perfect first solicitation opportunity, what would you want us to fund?
So, like the first project.
Yeah. Yep. No muss, no fuss, easy, out the door, solar panels on units, single-family homes would be a simple start. But I can't say that without saying how important these multifamily developments are and how you could really, again, blend, braid your funding in so we can gain much better energy efficiency with the projects we're going to do. But simplicity and timing couldn't be more important.
I want to hop in quickly before y'all continue. As I'm sitting with the concept of visiting cooperative housing, affordable units in other states, I'm curious about if that's come up in your work and what other things you would offer to Andrea's question.
Actually, my colleagues across the country, some of them do co-ops, and I think CASA of Oregon is working with a co-op model for manufactured homes and housing. Easier said than done, let me just say that emphatically. It's a great concept and usually kind of forced under pretty severe circumstances where people don't have any other choice but to kind of team up together. I think there's a wave of the future for some good and some bad reasons coming down the pike. So I think it's not happening aggressively right now. Co-housing is more and more, but co-ops will probably be part of our future, but it's not happening as frequently right now.
Back to your question, one of the things that PCRI is looking for specifically is really on the rehab side, residential rehab. So we have a need to get water heaters, weatherization, stormwater drain collection, all of those things that go into making older properties more energy efficient and more comfortable and health conscious for our residents.
I would not disagree with anything that's been said. I think the simpler the better on the first round. The clearer you can be with what you want to achieve, the better. You know, it could be very finite, and especially on a first round, we would all understand you can't do everything at once. So I don't know how much you have, but you could say, you know, $5 million for rehab, $5 million for new construction, bring us an exciting new proposal, and like the best leverage wins or something. You know, like it depends on what you want to achieve, but I think setting some easily quantified, measurable goals for the first round so that you have a win, so that you have you can clearly demonstrate that the money was used how you wanted it to be used and that we can quickly deploy it would be better for everybody.
I would say there are the nonprofits, many of them are here tonight, who know how to do home repair and loans. And that is a very underfunded, thank you, very scarce resource, especially the ones that are not citywide. And there are existing contracts already underway, and those agencies can scale up, and they are serving generally families of color, and they're very low income, and they need those repairs so they can stay in their home and not feel the pressure to have to sell, and they can keep then the wealth building. That is what we've been doing so much, and trying to keep those subsidies in creating a generational wealth asset building. That's really key. And then the second would be, as much as we can, bring those energy efficiencies before the building is constructed. The design, it's really hard to go back in time and change out your HVAC, to change out your heaters. It is best to do it from the beginning, and then you're not impacting, actual residents as you're doing that rehab. So I would say immediately would be the home repairs / loans, and then the second priority, ideally, if I can have a two, would be braiding with the new construction.
I was going to add, if you remember PHB's last slide, or one of the slides where it showed the average amount was about $3,000 to $4,000 for more or less rehabbing the property. We have experience in identifying really what the true cost and need. The real true dollar amount for a lot of the households that we serve in our homeownership retention program is between $15,000 to $25,000, and a lot of it, quite frankly, is energy efficiencies built into those households. some of the things that actually happens to some of the households is that if the repairs are not made, some typically will get fined, complaints are made, the house is not visually up to code, so to speak, and then that triggers an investigation, and some of the folks will lose homeowners insurance. So if the subsidy amount or support is not significant enough to improve the dwelling, there's also cascading effects that will actually cause that household to become homeless in some cases. Just a thought. The numbers make sense. Anything above 15 to 25,000 would be ideal for those households.
Awesome. Well, I was going to thank our guests. You guys are doing amazing work in the city, and I so appreciate that you're here to share with us. And I know the legacy of the work that you're doing, and I know how difficult it is. So thank you for fighting the good fight. Andrea had my last question, which is, what is the silver bullet for ending housing insecurity? So great. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I have one clarifying question that I've been saving. And Molly, you said basically Portland Housing Bureau has supported 20,000 units. Is that in Portland, right? 20,000 people. People. Got it. Different than units. And can you remind me of the unmet need?
Well, I believe, we know it's 22,000 for those that is between 0 to 30, and then it's another
40%, right? Something like that.
It's another several thousand after that. So I actually refer back to my slide.
Yeah, okay.
But it's probably between 25 and 30,000.
And in that calculation, is the city thinking about climate refugees and the growing city that we've got?
Oh, it's a huge topic. Absolutely. We're anticipating people will keep moving from California and other areas. I think we're going to continue to see huge unmet need in housing for the foreseeable future. It is really daunting to think about, but we're here to at least try to do as much as we can with the resources we have. Thank you for listening to us.
Yeah, thank you. And I know what a complicated subject this is as well, and you really made it easy for us to digest, so thank you.
And I think any of us would be happy to come back for more nitty-gritty workshops if you guys want to get into the financials and performance. We all have staff that can sit and do that with you.
And if you think of additional silver bullets to ending housing insecurity, every time we meet, there's a public comment period. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. Thank you all again for coming. We really, really appreciate it. We are going to, at this point in the meeting, move into a work session. And so the public is welcome to stay, but we are going to mute the phone line. I'm not sure if anybody ever called in. And we're going to ask our committee members to kind of move to this table over here. And a few of you can have a chair, and the rest of you should bring your own chair. Okay. Sam says that you can have a 2-minute break.